Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I'm Dan Richardson with Ascend Education, and I'm going to take you through a tour of Ascend and talk a little bit about differentiating math instruction for special education students and a study to that degree. Well, as we look over a classroom, you know that you have kids who are behind, and you probably know they're pretty far behind in many cases. But the most important thing is, do you know where their gaps exist and how to address them? It's not unusual in a classroom to see kids who are 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 grade levels behind. And it's almost an impossible task for a teacher who is sitting there asked to be responsible for them to be proficient at grade level, to address all those gaps behind grade level and fill in the foundational elements that are critical to them moving forward and understanding more sophisticated math. The average 7th grade intervention class in Ascend would probably have about 10% of the kids at grade level or nearly at grade level. And as you can see, there can be kids all over in the average class, 2, 3, 4, and 5 grade levels behind. This is what a dashboard for a teacher would look like on such a class, provided that this is a 7th grade level class. What Ascend Math does is it fills in the gaps by addressing the lowest grade level gaps behind grade level. Brian Scott, in his dissertation, did a study on the effectiveness of differentiated instruction in elementary mathematics classroom, using a diverse group of students with a wide range of abilities in math. What he found was that while differentiated instruction has a significant positive effect on achievement of high ability students, the lower ability students didn't show any improvement from differentiated instruction from the teachers. Last year he conducted a follow-up study, and this time he used Ascend Math to differentiate the instruction. He found that the lower ability students using Ascend showed significant improvement on their independent NWEA MAP scores. He concluded that the difference in performance of those students in the two studies was that the differentiation in Ascend was closely tied to each student's individual assessment results. Therefore, he concluded that differentiation for low ability students is significantly more effective when it's combined with assessment results to create an individualized study plan for each student. And that is what Ascend does, beginning with the process of an adaptive level recommendation test that shows the functional grade level of the student. Obviously, it adjusts to the student responses and comes up with a level that is the lowest competency level for that student. This is an example of Valley High School in Arizona that used Ascend for a period of 5 months, and this is where their levels showed in a 7th grade class. As you can see, after using us for that period of time, there was a significant shift in terms of grade level competency using the techniques that Ascend employs. Now a teacher, and I'll go into this in more detail a little bit later, has at their fingertips the ability to use data in real time in a format that's really easy to use and helpful. And I'll show you that in a little more detail in a bit. So what happens is that an individualized program is developed for the student based on assessment, pre-assessments once that student has developed that lowest common grade level, or lowest functioning grade level. Those assessments will populate their own individualized study plan, and they begin that process through instruction that's multiple modes, including things like video and manipulatives, as well as paper and pencil pieces. I'll show you a little bit more about that in more detail here in a moment. But always the assessment follows, and then the lessons continue, and the process continues as they move through their logical progression that was assessed in the beginning. The next unit occurs and the lessons refill once again. So what does that actually look like for a student? This particular student that I'm going to choose is David Fox. And David opens by logging in with his username and password, and you can see here that this is a dashboard of sorts for the student as they open up. Each one of those spikes on the mountain indicates an objective they're working on towards a unit completion. Each of the illuminated flags in the top right-hand corner indicate units they've completed, and each of the mountains that are to the right side of the mountain peak indicate grade levels that they have achieved. Now, they aren't defined to the student as grade levels, and nowhere does the student have any indication of what grade level they're working on. These are merely called levels. The lesson begins with, as I said, a paper and pencil PDF that can be printed out. Say that 5 times fast. And I'll show you what that looks like. It's also available in Spanish as well, as you may well have noted. It begins with a portion that follows closely with the video and then offers the opportunity for the students to use what they've learned and to show how they work through the problems. Also, often there are things like true-false questions that will involve definitions and key concepts that they'll be working on that are often expressed in the video. The next step is the video, and for the purposes of this demonstration, you won't be able to hear the instructor of this video. Know that it's closed captioned, and it's closed captioned in Spanish as well as the student being able to hear it. But for the purposes of shortening this, I'll show you some of the pop-ups that make it interactive. You may see something like, are you thinking about this problem? There may be a call to take notes because this particular part is important for your understanding this. You may have some definitions that the students will write down as they go through the video. There may be some opportunities to do exercises as well as they move through the video. In many cases, the response from the system will be like, good job, David. We'll name the student to personalize it. There may be some pop-up commentary about what they're experiencing. There can also be some questions where the student is just asked to answer the question, not multiple choice. Now this video is roughly 6 minutes, so I'm streaming through it quickly to show you the value of these pop-ups as the student progresses. Now at any point the student can rewind the video or move it back to a point to reinforce their understanding, and many of my special education educators will tell me that retention is a real serious concern with them with some special education kids, that essentially they don't, they learn something but then can't demonstrate it a few weeks later. This gives them the ability to review this in depth. The next step is a manipulative or an explore feature, and this is an exercise in dragging and dropping. And as you can see, the intersection point of these two is the product of 1/3 and 1/2. So it's a very useful tool in terms of a different approach to the particular problems that we're working on, and a mastery of the conceptual aspects of it as well, and not just algorithmic. The next step is a practice session, and that practice session is valuable to this student because it also is an exercise in curriculum as well. It's not just a practice episode. It can also be a thing where instruction is called for, and the student can watch a solution video that's specific to this particular problem when they've gotten an incorrect answer. They can also see the correct answer and then move along accordingly. So there's reinforcing instruction even in the practice area. The next step is a review session, and that will highlight a glossary of terms, for example, some of the key concepts that they've gone over. It's just an opportunity to kind of go back and make sure that they're understanding everything before they take the post-assessment. And if you noted as we went through here, the post-assessment is not unlocked until they have completed all of the work up to that point. I should mention too that the post-assessment is a randomized group of questions so that the student, should they fail that post-assessment, won't be seeing the same questions again when they take it, having reviewed once again the curriculum that's offered. So they can't just whiz through it, write down the answers, take a 5-question assessment, and then hope to just pass it by memory, etc., because they'll be seeing completely different questions. And even if in the off chance that they would see the same question again because of randomization, the order of the answers would be scrambled. Do I have any questions at this point? Okay, well, then I will move along. Oops, sorry about that. The student actually has a dashboard of their own where they can see exactly what they're doing. They can see what they're working on. They can see how many objectives they have left in a current unit. They can check their time on task, and I should mention the teachers can see that as well, the time on task, etc., which is, I think, a key piece of data for them to understand how the student is progressing, and for the student to understand that themselves. This is an example of a graphic representation of exactly how that plan for the student was developed. You'll note that in the purple here are areas that the student has shown mastery at that lowest grade level, and the blue or turquoise is a representation of areas where that student has proved that they have not mastered those concepts. And those concepts that were not mastered actually are the components of their particular individualized plan. But you as an educator can look in here and see how that was developed and what they're actually working on individually. A question that often comes up is, what's the recommended amount of time each week to be using Ascend for maximum results? And what we found is that 1.5 hours to 2 hours each week is the threshold that we see really outstanding gains. And we have people that break it down in all kinds of ways, 20 to 25 minutes, 5 times a week, 30 to 45 minutes, 3 times a week. They use carve-out periods, study halls, after and before school programs, RTI initiatives where periods are created specifically for them to improve their math scores, etc. Perhaps even more importantly, how much time does it take for the teacher? And to adequately review the reports and to act accordingly would require about 10 minutes a couple of times a week. Now, I should mention at this point that teachers who gather this data will use the data in their everyday interaction with the student to assist them, but certainly in terms of just understanding what they're doing, etc., it's a minimal amount of time. Also, Ascend resources, as you can see, can be used for whole class instruction or small group instruction, etc. The actual lesson that I was earlier showing you is up on the board that this teacher is using for the entire class. This is an example of the teacher dashboard, and as I mentioned, you can look at things like the objectives completed by your students and the hours worked in that particular week. And of course, you always want to see a higher ratio of objectives completed than hours worked. It shows that they're moving forward. You can see their level growth from the beginning. You set the timetable, but let's say from the beginning of the year until now, and the turquoise here represents where they are, and the purple indicates where they were when they began. This shows where they are right now as a snapshot for a teacher. And of course, if the teacher clicks through, they can see the data that generated this. And also you can look as a quick kind of thumbnail at how many grade levels students have completed in your class. In addition to that, there is a course progress report that can show you important things like pre and post assessment scores, the time spent on post assessment, time on task, and a variety of other data, including which particular strand they're working on or Common Core standard that they're working on, depending on whether we're aligned with the state standard or aligned with Common Core. Now, many of our schools in Virginia, for example, have Virginia state standards. Others have Common Core, and we have alignments that are properly done with each of those. We also have a dashboard for the administrator that gives you a 20,000-foot view, but important data nevertheless. It shows you how many students are actually logging on, how many of the teachers are logging on, the total amount of hours the students are working, their average pre and post assessment scores, are they moving in the right direction, and the average amount of time per week that the students are using Ascend. Here's an example then of some of the success stories that we've seen for Ascend in an environment where special education needs were prominent. This is a middle school in Fort Stockton, Texas, and they were failing AYP as a result of the special education population in particular. And they had less than a 58% proficiency rate with their special education students at grade level. The goal, which was an ambitious goal by their principal, was 75% proficiency after using Ascend for a 6-month period, and the actual result was 86% proficiency at grade level. In Indiana, we had a middle school using Ascend between October of 2011 to March of 2012, about 5 months. And as you can see, about 66% or 64%, I should say, of the kids using it in the special education classes enjoyed at least a 1.5 to 2 grade level gain. As you can see, 20% were less than a year, so 80% achieved a grade level or more, and 12% was more than 3 years of grade level gain, and 8% were more than 4 years of grade level gain. Special education students find this particularly engaging because of the independence that it gives them, I believe, and also a lot of the interactive features they find attractive, as any student would. In a high school in Texas, Challenge High School actually, or also known as Texas Challenge Academy, you can see in just a 3-month period of time some of the outstanding grade level gains. 67% of the kids did 1 grade level or more in that 3-month period. That sums up some of the things that we've seen in the way of successes, but does anyone have any questions for me about Ascend? Please feel free to ask immediately.
I have one. Like, when y'all are researching, looking at the effectiveness, like, I saw some of the times you had on there, your special ed was for 3 hours. Is there a minimum that you recommend every week? Like minimum amount of hours in front on a sim that you recommend?
Well, yeah, earlier in the presentation we were indicating maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours per week looks to be an optimum. Perhaps a minimum might be around an hour to 45 minutes. However, what you have to keep in mind is that, like for example, a Tier 2 student will usually take about 30 to 40 minutes to complete an objective, and we would really like students to complete at least an objective or more a week, because then they have a sense of progress and they're invested in it a bit and they start to see success. So the more they use it up until that point that I described as optimal, the better, really.